As US President Donald Trump announced what he calls a historic Gaza deal, the details reveal a fragile balance. Netanyahu has agreed to halt Israel's offensive to prepare for detainee release, while Hamas accepted parts of Trump's plan. Yet, the occupation army continues to bomb Gaza, killing civilians even as negotiations are announced. Will this deal truly bring an end to the war, or is it another maneuver by Israel to delay full withdrawal? Will this ceasefire hold, or will the occupation army continue its aggression, and will Trump succeed in turning this framework into a binding agreement? Welcome to In Depth. Now, according to the Washington Post, both Israel and Hamas signaled readiness to engage in peace talks under President Donald Trump's 20-point plan, but deep divisions remain. Hamas conditionally accepted the proposal offering to release all detainees, while Israel paused its ground offensive and reduced airstrikes to prepare for indirect negotiations in Egypt. Yet, disputes over the occupation army's withdrawal from Gaza remain the central obstacle. Netanyahu insists forces will remain until Hamas is disarmed and Gaza demilitarized, a step Trump's plan requires. Hamas leaders expressed willingness to relinquish governance of Gaza, but disagreements linger over disarmament. Israel, meanwhile, seeks to maintain a buffer zone even after detainees are released. Civilian suffering continues as airstrikes kill dozens, fueling skepticism that any deal will hold for Palestinians in Gaza who have endured years of war, blockade, and famine. Hopes are tempered by repeated collapse of previous ceasefires. Now, according to The Guardian, U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner have been sent to Egypt to finalize details of a Gaza ceasefire plan backed by Trump. Trump said in interviews that we are very close to an agreement that would tie the release of Israeli detainees to a phased withdrawal of the occupation army, with talks between Israeli and Hamas delegations set to begin on Monday. The Guardian notes that the diplomacy comes amid continued Israeli attacks that killed dozens of Palestinians on Saturday, despite Trump's call for bombing to stop. Israeli strikes on homes and public areas in Gaza City left dozens dead, many of them women and children. Hamas condemned ongoing massacres, questioning Netanyahu's claims of scaling back operations. Trump told Axios the U.S. is close to sealing a Gaza peace deal, pressing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to accept it by saying, "This is your chance for victory." Trump said Netanyahu had no choice but to move forward after the call Friday. Trump's intervention brought Israel and Hamas closer than at any point in nearly 2 years of war. Israel said it paused its offensive and shifted to a defensive posture. Trump framed the deal as not only ending the war, but also restoring Israel's global standing, which he said was badly damaged.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced what he described as a breakthrough in Gaza diplomacy. He stated that Israel, under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has accepted a withdrawal line inside Gaza. The agreement links this step to Hamas confirming the release of detainees, a move that would trigger an immediate ceasefire. Trump presented the plan as a personal achievement, emphasizing his direct role in pushing the negotiations forward. According to officials, he personally contacted Netanyahu to secure final approval, highlighting his hands-on approach. Netanyahu, facing growing political pressure at home, informed his cabinet that the release of all detainees could be announced in the coming days. Still, doubts remain. After nearly 2 years of Israeli aggression and destruction in Gaza, many question whether the occupation army will truly follow through with a withdrawal. The mechanism of the deal makes Hamas confirmation the decisive factor. If the group agrees, the ceasefire and Israeli withdrawal are expected to take effect immediately, according to Trump. Challenges, however, remain significant. Netanyahu's far-right coalition has voiced opposition to concessions, while Israel's past breakage of a ceasefire agreement earlier this year raises questions about Israel's commitment to peace. For civilians in Gaza, the outcome is critical. 2 years of bombardment, famine, and blockade have left widespread devastation. The promise of a withdrawal and ceasefire offers a rare moment of hope, yet the risk of collapse remains high.
For more analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Mr. Mohammed Osman, International Relations Specialist, and from Washington by Ms. Ginger Chapman, lawyer and political analyst. Welcome to you both in depth. And let me here start by Ms. Osman. Ms. Osman, Trump declared that Israel accepted a withdrawal line in Gaza and that now the deal hinges on Hamas confirming the line and detainee releases. What does this reveal about Washington's leverage over Israel? And also, do you think Trump is again throwing the ball in Hamas' courts? And exactly what did he mean by telling Netanyahu, this is your chance for victory?
Thank you for having me, Mona. Of course, the United States has all the leverage it needs over Israel to pressure to adhere to the agreement or the proposal or the plan, if proposed by President Trump. I think we are moving in the right direction. I am cautiously optimistic. I think we have achieved so far the consent of both Israel and Hamas in principle to adhere to the agreement, even though both sides have reservations on the agreement, and not only Hamas, because people like to say, oh, Hamas refused the disarmament or ignored disarmament. Well, Israel does have reservations too. That Trump plan, for example, proposes for starting discussions over the two-state solution at the end of the day. And Prime Minister Netanyahu flatly rejected that right in front of Trump in the White House. And President Trump said that he understands Netanyahu's refusal. So I think we have to get these things out in the open so that everyone would understand. Because if this plan fails, and by the way, when it might very well fail, they will try to pin it and blame it on the Palestinian side as usual. We should know that if this fails, probably it will be because of the Israelis. Of course, Hamas has to act responsibly and has to act in a very selfless manner at this point, and to put forward Palestinian interests before anything else. However, the Israelis are the ones who actually have the power on the ground. And this brings me to a question. The idea of the withdrawal. Right now, Trump announced, and he posted the map of the first phase of withdrawal, which would entail that Israel will withdraw from all of the territories it acquired in the Gideon's Chariots operation, Gideon's Chariots 2, the second version of the operation, which was launched against Gaza City and other parts of the Gaza Strip, primarily in the north. Now they will have to withdraw from this area in order to allow for the detainee exchange to take place. And also they need to stop the bombing. President Trump demanded that Israel stop the bombing. And as you might very well know, Mona, the bombing is still going on until now. Mm-hmm. Yes, they scaled back the bombing. They stopped the ground operation. They froze the front line, yet they are still bombarding the Gaza Strip. Yesterday, 60 Palestinians died. Today also, people died in central Gaza when airstrikes were launched. Of course, the bombing is much less frequent now, but it is still there. So Israel needs to adhere to the agreement first and stop the bombing and halt their military operation at this point, seriously do that, and begin redeploying their troops to withdraw from the designated areas designated by President Trump, not by the Palestinians, not by anyone, but by anybody else. And this will facilitate the talks that are to take place tomorrow here in Egypt between the Palestinian, indirect talks, of course, between the Palestinian factions and Israel to work out the technicalities and the details for the release or for the execution of the hostage and prisoners of war exchange deal. If the Israelis do not adhere to their terms and their commitments under each and every step under this agreement, then of course it will be destined to fail more.
Mr. Osman, you're speaking here about a party that is, as much as possible, is provoking the other side in order to come out with actions that would put everything in jeopardy, not to mention that that they are trying as much as possible to provoke them after the Hamas response, which was very precise. Let me here go to Ms. Chapman. Ms. Chapman, Trump posts and later his video praising Hamas announcement a few minutes after it was published came as a surprise. And it also raised questions whether Trump has talked with Netanyahu before doing so, which had put Israel in a difficult position. How unusual is it for Washington to directly recognize Hamas as a negotiating partner?
Yes, well, first, Ms. Mona, greetings to you and also to Dr. Osman and your viewers. And what we are seeing is, surprisingly, even though Trump has said that he is the greatest friend Israel has had, even though during Trump's first term, he rarely, if ever, stood up to Netanyahu and Israel, here now in this term, he is determined to stop the fighting. And what we've seen is that Trump frequently confuses stopping the fighting with an end to the war. But right now, this may be enough to help the process move forward. We may be closer to a cessation of hostilities and a movement toward peace and a two-state solution than at any time in the past. Although there are still monumental hurdles, still the question of IDF withdrawal and the cessation of the bombing versus questions of Hamas disarming. We have seen that Hamas has been almost neutralized as a military entity. However, Hamas is it's the civil government of Gaza, so it will be more difficult, if not impossible, to get rid of Hamas as a political entity. So Israel will not get what they want in that regard. And the other thing that seemed significant is that Trump said twice, everyone will be treated fairly. So this seems to suggest that Trump is willing to not be so one-sided in favor of Israel. This could be a result of the world seeing Netanyahu repeatedly breaking ceasefires, repeatedly contradicting Trump, and repeatedly doing things that Trump says Israel will not do. So there's tension between Trump and Israel right now. Even with Trump saying that he is unconditionally supporting Israel. So Hamas completely surprised Israel when they agreed to the hostage return and the exchange of prisoners. In a sense, this has put Netanyahu in a box. It has limited what Netanyahu can do without appearing to defy any upcoming peace process. So if we can work through and this will be the most difficult, the release of the hostages, because of the condition of Gaza. It is reduced to rubble. This is going to greatly inhibit or thwart the return of the hostages. Trump acknowledges this when he says that Israel must stop bombing, which, as we have seen, they have not stopped the bombing. Now they're saying it's defensive instead of offensive bombing, which everyone can see there is no offense being mounted by the Gazans at this time. So hopefully at this point we can Trump can induce Netanyahu to stop the bombing long enough, we can have a proceed toward an exchange of hostages, then the exchange of prisoners,
Yes.
and then move on to the withdrawal of IDF forces, the stopping of the comprehensive military campaign by Israel in Gaza, and then move forward to the other aspects as far as who will be in charge of governance, the stabilization plan.
Definitely. Those are the terms that are to be negotiated later on after the first, at least, accordance for the first steps to be taken. But what is really confusing here, Ms. Chapman, is the sudden and surprisingly shift in the U.S. policy. We'll get to that again. Ms. Osman, let me here ask you. Now, according to the plan, Hamas confirmation will trigger a ceasefire, supposedly. However, Hamas statement that Trump addressed and the White House has shared what he said on its web site avoids addressing the contentious issues like disarmament and Gaza's post-war governance. So what do you have on that?
I think that this is something like that the Israelis want to release or an exchange of the hostages and the prisoners without a conclusive ceasefire. They need to have a state of hostilities, and I believe, in action in order to ensure that they will keep the pressure on the Palestinian side when they move forward with the second phase of the plan. Marco Rubio today spoke to one of the American mainstream media outlets, and he was revealing how the U.S. and Israel are thinking about this. They are now hyper-focused on the idea of releasing the hostages, securing their release, the dead ones and the living ones. And by the way, Mona, this is very alarming to me because I truly have fears that this might be just a ruse, like a trick to secure the release of the hostages and take away one of the very few cards that is supposedly left in the hands of Hamas. So I believe that the important and the hard questions will be answered in the second phase of the agreement and the plan, if it is implemented eventually. The question of disarmament on the Palestinian side, the disarmament of Hamas, the question of the post-war governance of Gaza. And just as my dear colleague, Ms. Chapman, has said, Hamas is part of Gaza's reality. You cannot completely eliminate it. You can, even if you disarm Hamas and you force them to lay down their weapons, and if you replace them with a new government, they will be always a part of the Palestinian social fabric and also a part of the Palestinian political scene, whether we like it or not. I'm not a big fan of Hamas, but we have to be realistic about this. So these are very hard questions that need to be answered, and the Americans need to deal with them in a logical way and in a level-headed way. They cannot be completely biased to the Israeli side, because what the Israelis want is no agreement. What the Israelis want is a continuation of this war till the end, until they completely destroy Gaza and make it uninhabitable, displace the population from it, and annex it. This is the end game of the Israelis, and I do still believe that that is still the end game. So if Trump sees this through and applies the necessary pressure to implement this plan in full, I would be surprised. And it would be definitely a groundbreaking shift in U.S. policy with regards to Israel, which will prove that the United States really commands a certain scope of autonomy when it comes to making policy with regards to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And who knows, it might actually lead to something that is that could lead to a pathway to actual peace, which is very, very far away from reach at this point. However, I do to take myself and take you and the audience back to the realm of realism, Mona, which is usually much darker and much more pessimistic than we like it to be. Unfortunately,
I take it from your point to Ms. Chapman, and this is exactly the feelings here in the Middle East: suspicion and confusion about about the shift of the US policy. That is a very big question mark for the Middle East and for the mediators and for the parties themselves. Why the sudden shift in the policy? Why Trump is really eager for bringing peace suddenly? Ms. Chapman, what is all this about, and why do you think this shift happened? Plus, of course, that despite Trump telling Israel to stop the war immediately, the occupation army continues to escalate attacks. So what do you think about that?
Well, those are excellent questions, Mona. And first, just with respect to what Dr. Osman said, it appears that Trump had put Hamas in a position where for them to not give up the hostages would be suicide. He really put them in a no-win situation, give up the hostages or else. And even though everyone is afraid, of course, of as soon as they give up the hostages, their only leverage, Israel will let loose with a bombardment and destroy all of Gaza. That is everyone's fear. However, in this instance, it seems that because of the international the eyes on Israel, it would be very difficult for them to break. Well, there's no ceasefire, but it would be very politically untenable. It could be the end of Israel if they defied and broke this part of the agreement by getting the hostages back and then bombing. So Trump seems to have put Netanyahu in a box as much as he has put Hamas in a box. And of course, we all know Netanyahu is going to do whatever he can to break the ceasefire, to resume hostilities. So he is the wild card at this point. The other wild card is what is happening in America. We have never seen anything like this, but the American people have rapidly and exponentially turned against Israel, turned against Netanyahu. American social media, even the legacy media, has been full of essentially the Americans are now fighting over Israel and over Netanyahu. Many of Netanyahu's speeches and statements that have been airing in the United States have angered Americans. The majority of Americans now believe that Netanyahu has been using America as a tool, that the war in the Middle East has cost us trillions of dollars, bloodshed, and we have nothing to show for it except the hate and enmity of other countries. What was most alarming to American citizens is we saw that we saw Trump take the social media platform TikTok away from China on the basis that China had foreign influence in America through TikTok. And then he appeared to just give it away, sell it to billionaire Israelis such as Larry Ellison, who owns Oracle, and a couple of other Israeli groups that are very wealthy. And the American people hate this. We have already seen the effects on TikTok and with posts being censored. And they did this because TikTok was pro-Palestinian. TikTok was showing the images coming from Gaza and the West Bank. TikTok was a platform where Americans, young people especially, could speak freely and air their opinions on Palestine and Israel. This was untenable. So we saw Netanyahu's speech where he said they just bought TikTok to keep the hearts and minds of the American Christians, the evangelicals, and now they are going after the platform X and Elon Musk. Now, this has angered young people. This has also angered Republicans. And on X, we are seeing an outflow of anger and outrage towards Israel, towards their control of the American government, the American foreign policy, and their takeover of TikTok. And now they're trying to silence Republican voices on X. And we are seeing prominent media personalities such as Tucker Carlson, Glenn Greenwald, Jeffrey Sachs, John Mearsheimer, Colonel Douglas McGregor, Daniel Davis. We are seeing a flood of American voices speaking out against the Israeli influence over America. And this has angered Americans more than anything because we are independent. We want our freedom of speech. And it has become apparent to us that the Israeli control of our government is untenable and harming America. And Trump is paying attention to this. Trump is finally paying attention to the voices of the American people, and he sees this as untenable. And this is tearing apart the Republican Party, as well as has the Democrat Party is already 75, 80% behind Israel, behind Palestine, against Israel, and now this is happening to the Republican Party. So this threatens Trump's base. It threatens his economic agenda, and he now has to pay attention to the flood of voices that are protesting Israel takeover of American governance.
Yes, actually, Ms. Chapman, this has been witnessed all over the world. We've been seeing protests all over the world about the Gaza crisis, and not just in the United States. Let me go here to Mr. Osman. Mr. Osman, Netanyahu told his cabinet he hopes to announce all detainees release soon. Now, what are the chances that Israel will resume the attacks after the detainee release? And I guess that you mentioned that before. And what monitoring mechanism would be necessary to ensure Israel's compliance? What do we need here as per guarantees?
I think before I answer your question, Mona, I would like just to comment very quickly on what Ms. Chapman said. And I do admire her optimism at the beginning of her statement, and I do hope that she's right. I truly am.
We all hope.
And the only thing that gives me hope is U.S. citizens like Ms. Chapman, people who identify even among Trump's power base, from the Republicans, from the conservatives, yet they refuse to be led in such a blind way into supporting Israel blindly in something that is so unethical. And they have the power to influence their administration, to do what's right and to be on the right side of history. So I commend what she just said, and I have to applaud her for that, if she would allow me. Coming to your question, Mona, I think that unfortunately, there aren't any valid guarantees. The only ones who can give any guarantees on behalf of the Israelis or to protect people from the Israelis are the Americans, the United States. So that's why the U.S. commitment to this agreement and their adherence and being fair, just as President Trump said he is being fair to everyone, or that everyone will be treated fairly. So within the framework of this word he usually writes at the end of many of his posts pertaining to the latest developments in the Middle East and in Gaza, I believe that he has to up the ante against Netanyahu. He pressured Netanyahu, according to Axios even, when he spoke to him to inform him that Hamas has agreed to the agreement, Netanyahu wasn't happy. And Trump told him, like, why do you have to be negative? And he inserted an inappropriate word between you and negative. And he told him, like, you have to accept it. And I'm giving you a win and you have to take it. I think Trump needs to continue this attitude and this way of treatment of Netanyahu and the Israeli government. This is the only guarantee, Mona, that Israel will comply, that Israel will withdraw, that they will refrain from attacking Gaza, that they will refrain from resuming the war, and that they will see through the implementation of this plan till the end, whether with or without adjustments. And on the other hand, just to be fair also, to be balanced, Hamas has to continue acting responsibly. And if it's necessary for them to make the necessary sacrifices for the sake of their people and for the sake of the Palestinian cause and its continued survival, they have to do what is right. And you know what I mean.
So we're speaking here about a sincere will.
Yeah.
A sincere will. Well, I guess just commenting on what you said, Mr. Mohammed Osman, and commanding what Ms. Chapman said, nations are nations, and nations aspire only for peace, prosperity, and life. This is what nations in the world need. That was Mr. Mohammed Osman, international relations specialist, and Ms. Ginger Chapman, lawyer and political analyst. We thank you so much for your very valuable insights as usual. And I guess that concludes today's episode of In Depth. Many thanks for joining us, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.